very, very much to them. My name's Seamus Jefferson. I'm the director of CONCORD. CONCORD is the Confederation, European Confederation of Development NGOs. And one of our very active working groups has been in migration and development over many years. So we're very happy to, with our partners, have invited you here and organised a discussion around the launch of two publications, a spotlight report and a paper on 10 myths of migration and development. I'm going to say a few words of introductions, but first, before I do that, just to say a little bit how things will work. So one sort of announcement, I was like, if I could ask everybody to sign on the paper, that would be great. Then we have contact with everybody and we know who was here. That's very important. I maybe want to start by seeing who we have here. If I can ask people based in Brussels, if you're based in Brussels, you want to put your hand up so we know. Okay, and people not based in Brussels. Okay, so good, 2/3, a third, I would say. How about people that are members of CONCORD members or somehow related with CONCORD and not? Okay, okay, great. So as in all these things, we've got an ambitious agenda. We want to talk about a lot of things. I want to say one word about CONCORD and our involvement in this topic of migration and development before introducing the first panel and asking them all to say a word. One of the questions always for me is what's the added value of CONCORD on this topic? Topic of migration and the refugee issue that we're facing today is one that many people are working on from many different angles. And I think we all need to ask what's the different added value of the different parties and how do we make it work as effective as possible. One of the aspects of this issue is the European aspect, in the sense that in our continent, I think we all see there's quite a cleavage of opinion geographically, in terms of political class and NGOs and civil society. And I think part of our role is to encourage not only advocacy for policy change, but also debate and discussion, that we understand the questions better, that we understand different perspectives better, and that we support each other in what we have in common, which is to have a human and a human rights approach to this issue, that we stay true to our values, and that we do that in a European context. And we are battling forces that call all those issues into question. We're going to say some strong things today to the policymakers who we've invited to come and talk to us. That's absolutely as it should be, and I'm sure they will understand that. It's not because we want to criticise governments or the EU. I think what we all believe in is a European approach. I think that is also a common denominator before us. So I think we'll need to say our points very strongly, to stay with respect to the people who also in their own way are representing their own institutions or governments in their positions. And finally, to see how we can turn this interest, understanding and energy into action. Just a word about the Spotlight paper and the Spotlight series. One of the bits of work that we've been doing a lot in our network in CONCORD is to acknowledge the fact that whereas 10, 20, 30 years ago, we would focus mainly on what was called development policy and development budgets, we understood over the years and in our discussion with partners in countries in which we work and with whom we're in solidarity, is that it's not always the aid budgets, and sometimes it's less and less the aid budgets that have an impact positively or negatively on people's lives. So increasingly, we work on other policies that have an impact on poor and vulnerable people around the world. This is enshrined in EU treaties, and it's our job to hold to account the politicians who are implementing these treaties. So we've done a series of what we call spotlight reports, where we shine the light on what we say are policies that are incoherent with those goals enshrined in the treaties. And this one is about migration and development. I want to pay great tribute to the working group and the colleagues, many of them are here, who've been working on this paper. They have been extremely busy in the last 6 months, a year. Very busy even before that, and I think that's also very important to point out, is that the topic of the relationship between migration and development is not one that suddenly popped up a year ago. It's something that we've been working on, many of us, for many years. But clearly in the last 6 months, it's been extremely, it's been a hot topic, and those people have been under huge demands from different stakeholders, parts of the constituency, so on. And that they've managed to get out this document, which again, I think is short, clear, but very punchy, very sort of purpose-orientated. I think it's a great testimony to their work. So Bob Vanderlyn is in the front row here. Bob, maybe stand up so people know who you are. Is the chair of the Migration Development Working Group. Thanks, Bob. He works for CONCORD in the Netherlands. And then two of the speakers we have from the panel now. So Sophie Ngogia, from ICMC, based here in Brussels, so which is the International Catholic Migration Commission, who I've met sort of working overseas, so it's great to see you here. And Sigida Camara from Forum, which is an organisation working with diaspora communities in Europe. And Sigida, you're also a very active member of Coordination Sud, which is the French NGO platform, one of our partners. And also joining us here is Mohammed. I've forgotten your second name, Mohammed. Ajamir, thanks, Mohammed, who's originally from near Aleppo in Syria, and has been living in Belgium for the last year. And I thought it would be very good or we thought it would be very good for Mohammed to come and join us and try to give a little bit his perspective on his journey and his what we're all doing, inadequate in many ways as it sometimes feels. So welcome to all of you three, and I'm going to ask you to each say a few words and give us a little bit your perspective. After that, Connie Reuter from Solidar is going to introduce a second round of guests that will be from the EU institutions, from the UN. I think Barbara, you just joined us from the UNDP, head of the UNDP. Very good to have you here. And from the Dutch government. And then we can have hopefully a good, respectful, but hopefully robust discussion with policymakers to see how we can move our policy forward, policy goals forward. Let's say a last word of thanks and acknowledgement to Blondine and my own team in the Secretariat. For all the work putting this event together and supporting the Migration and Development Task Force. It's early in the year, it's all been put together very quickly, but I think it's a topic that has deserved that effort and that everybody wants to talk about. We're live streaming, Hélène, so hopefully people, I should really address myself at the live stream. Hello to anybody who may I think I'm going to stop talking and start with Sigida. Can you maybe come and stand here? Maybe it's easier because then you have the light in your face. Okay, good to see you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Sigida Camara from the Forum. So first of all, I would like to apologize for my English because it's not very good. So to be more comfortable, I read all the things that I had to say today, but and for you, I won't read all of it and be very quick. I will be presenting the 10-myth paper, which is an awareness-raising tool which aims to dismantle 10 misconceptions on migration and development. And I will try to put it. So. So thank you for giving me the floor. And when I was asked to present the 10-myth paper, the first thing that came into my mind was the first meeting of the Migration and Development Task Force. It was in Brussels 1 year and a half ago. And I remember we were speaking about the European policies. We were talking about the post-2015 agenda. And in this discussion, one of us said, we need to demystify migration and development and the perception on migration and development. And then the debate stopped, and we all agreed. there was no discussion about that point. And actually, my own organization, Forum, was thinking about such an initiative at the French level. And a partner such as ICMC was also thinking on the side of doing the same. And why we had all this unanimous agreement on that, it is because we all came to the same conclusion, that the debate on migration and development is laced with misconception. And that those ideas may be so prevalent that they can justify personal or collective behaviors. They can justify even some policies. And yet, we know that migrants, international migrants or internal migrants, contribute to the development and the well-being of their countries of origin, but also of their countries of destination. And the 2013 agenda recognizes it. But we can say that in this context, current context of tension, political and social tension around migration issues, and considering a manifest disregard of migration and development nexus, it was essential for us to tackle those myths. Indeed, let me put on the table one fact. We must admit that there is an increasing gap between the positions that are taken by policymakers at international level and the reality on the ground. And I'm sure you will agree with me on that point. Let me here put into perspective two points. The declaration of the higher-level dialogue of 2013, which was quite ambitious. The 2030 agenda, which promotes an inclusive development where no one will be left behind. And on the other hand, the fact that everything is done by the EU, but not only the EU, to prevent migrants from reaching Europe and to fix people at home, with the underlying idea that migration is a threat. So as an NGO working on migration and development issues, and personally as a member of a national migrant platform, Forum represents 1,000 migrant-led organization in France. When you read in the press that the Secretary of State said that the SDGs would be the solution to the problem of migration, when you go to an appointment with a politician who off the record tell you that he totally agree with your position, but he cannot support it publicly because it is not the public opinion is not ready to hear it, and the implication is that he won't support your recommendation publicly. You come to the conclusion that dialogue with policymakers and the production of knowledge on migration and development is not sufficient anymore. Because the right decision cannot be taken if they are based on wrong postulates. And the public opinion cannot understand the right decisions when during years they have been told that the solution is the opposite. So the public opinion is being taken as an excuse by decision makers not to take the necessary and ambitious measures. CONCORD, ICMC, but also the Forum, decided to join their efforts and to go outside their usual cycles and to spread the knowledge on migration and development. And the idea behind that was that we need to democratize all we know about migration and development. And we must speak to citizens as targets, but also as actors for a change of perception on migration and migrants. The objective of the 10-minute paper and the 10-minute campaign is clearly to mobilize citizens. The mobilization will be the only way, it seems to be the only way to bring policymakers to take the right decision. So, and to translate what they are saying and Development Task Force, we strongly believe that migration is an opportunity for development, and that migrants and diaspora are powerful actors and subject to sustainable human development. They create bridges between peoples and territories. They support their families and communities of origin through remittances, but they also lead miscellaneous initiatives of local development. And they transfer in their country of origin, but also in their country of destination, new knowledge, skills, and values. And but the condition for them to ensure such a role should be guaranteed. That means we need to guarantee the respect of their human, social, economical, and cultural rights. And we also believe that effort should be focused on making migration a choice and not a necessity, and not instead of being focused on building walls and preventing people from crossing borders. Because migration is part of humanity, and people will always move as they have always done. So we chose to bring, I would like to add that research, facts and figures, but above all, migrants' lived experience show that this is the truth. Migration is an opportunity. So we chose to bring all those elements, facts, figures, but migrant testimonies together and bring them into the public debate. Within that, it is this 10-minute paper. And we try to use a simple language and to present migrant testimonies so it can be accessible to everyone and give migrants a floor for one time and raise migrant and diaspora voices. Our ambitions here is to spread the word that migration is an opportunity. And by doing that, we will become the best friends of the policymakers that who agree with us, but can tell. And I remember, just to finish here, Peter Sutherland during the last GFMD said that civil society was the last bulwark against prejudice on migration. And we are fully aware of that, and we will assume our responsibilities, even if we know that it won't be easy. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stefano. I work for ICMC, so the International Catholic Migration Commission. I will actually continue on exactly the same topic. I would like to start by thanking CONCORD for giving us the opportunity to present this tool today. For him as well, for the great collaboration over the last month, and some members of the Migration and Development Task Force, also for the great collaboration, and special thanks also for CONCORD for actually selecting this initiative for funding during the European Year for Development last year. So if I go back to the tool, this tool was created, as Divida said, because members of the Migration and Development Task Force, Forum, ICMC, all felt the same need, like the same sense of urgency. We all felt the urgent need to work on a counter-narrative, which means something that would contribute to tackle the misconceptions and also the simplifications that we can find in the migration and development debate, and that contribute to spread negative perceptions towards migrants and also people with a migrant background. The current political climate and context and the rise of xenophobic and racist political parties and growing anti-immigrant feelings make us think that we were right to work towards that direction. Negative public opinions about refugees and migrants are often stirred up by distorted media accounts. I'm just going to mention some words and expressions that we almost hear or read every day, either in articles or in public discourses on migrants and migration. Migration flows, stemming migration flows, waves of migrants, explosive migration, mass migration, massive wave of newcomers, organized invasion. The list could just go on forever, and I'm sure you're just all very familiar with those terms. So with this tool, what we wish to change is really the rhetoric by reshifting the focus on people. So that's the reason why we decided not only to counter those myths by sharing facts and figures, but also by sharing personal stories. To remind everyone that each time we talk about migration, we talk about men and women who sometimes made the choice to leave their country, but also in some other cases were forced to leave their countries. So why is this tool and this campaign important? We live in a world where we receive a lot of information, whether that is through the newspapers, through television, the internet, through school, also through the daily conversations that we are having one with another. And all those things that we hear contribute to shape our opinions. And through this campaign, we want to recognize the role that each one of us can play as information transmitter and receiver. And so the aim of the tool is really to make sure that each time information is shared on migration, on migrants, this information is as accurate as possible, which means as close to the reality as possible. The second reason why this tool is important is because policies also sometimes fail because they are based on those same misconceptions. And one example, so here on the screen, you can see some examples of the myth that we dealt with. I'm just going to take this one as an example also because it's really relevant to this discussion that you're going to have in the second part of this workshop. So this myth is really very much linked to the use of development aid. So we have chosen to deal with this myth because it reflects lots of concerns which are being raised by NGOs. And what we chose to remind under the section on facts and figures is first and foremost that development aid is about eradication of poverty. This is enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty. The second point that we make is that when we make the fight against irregular migration one of the main objectives of development aid, the risk is that some countries are actually left out of development aid or receive less money just because they are not major migrant sending countries. And the third point that we make is that we question even the effectiveness of such an approach, in the sense that it is well proven that the poorest of the poor are not the ones who migrate the most. So what is this tool about and who is it for? For me, this is really first of all, a capacity building tool and an awareness raising tool. So the tool comprises 10 cards structured around 10 myths on migration and development. And each one of those myths proposes like 2 to 3 main arguments to counter the myth, or to sometimes mitigate the myth, because sometimes there is still perhaps a part of truth behind those. And each one of those arguments is documented by sources. And I say that it's a capacity building tool because, of course, we want to reach out to citizens, but the reason why we are presenting the tool today is also that we want to reach out to you and to civil society organizations who work with other civil society organizations, or sometimes also with citizens. So it aims to provide national and local civil society actors with the necessary arguments to tackle those misconceptions and also to hold debates on those questions. So this campaign matters because it concerns all of us, and I think that all of us can actually seize this tool and do something about it, something which may be different. I mean, we have some ideas, but we would be really happy to discuss the ideas that you have yourself. And so the tool is almost ready. And we are first and foremost looking forward now for this tool to be used. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and good evening. I am Hagenaars from Syria. I am here in Belgium as I get refugee status. I'm here in Belgium for 1 year and a half. Yesterday, I was speaking with my house boss, my house owner, and he told me if he born in another country full of fear or war, he definitely will come to Europe. He says this because he understands what situation there and what people afraid. So they try to another country to find a new life, or chance to start a new life for his future or his children's future. So I wrote some idea and I can share it to you. A lot of refugees and migrants came from his country full of hope to find a new life with no fear. They are full of things. Many of them are highly educated, and the other they are hard workers. And I think that by having these people, for sure, can help developing new connections, lines between two cultures. And I think also they understand each other better, and that we can destroy the base of fear, which is good for the development of both of the country of origin country. and new country of residence. And when they integrate in the new life and the new society, they will support this new society economically and I think academically. And also I think that every human needs to feel accepted in order to have normal life in his new country or where he live in. And when any of us feel that doesn't belong to the place he lives, and he will lose his interest and disappointment, and that disappointment will cause permanent damage in his soul and can affect their spirit of survival and building their own future. It may affect judgment peoples about this people and insult them, and it's not good for humanity. And affect also, he will not be able to pass this development process.
Okay. And I know it's not easy. I was 5 years in Jordan, and if I thought I could speak Arabic to an audience after that, I make mistakes. So thanks very much. And we'll have time for to ask to speak to Evangeline, so I want to introduce the spotlight report.
Thanks very much, Seamus. And thanks very much, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Also for sharing your personal stories and reflections on this topic, and also on your journey. And hope you feel welcome here today, but also in Belgium, in Europe, as one of the many refugees that have joined our society since recently. I heard that the laptop was that there was an issue with the laptop and the PowerPoints were not possible. It's no problem because my own laptop broke down last night, so I in the sort of 1970s handwriting style. So don't worry, it's okay.
F5. Okay, yeah.
F5.
Just F5 will be. Okay.
Let me just thank Seamus for the opportunity to speak here today, presenting the analysis of the Migration and Development Task Force on PCD or PCSD, as we may to say now, Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development in the area of migration and development. And I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate the collective inputs of all the working group members in the drafting process of this spotlight paper. In particular, Sophia Wiersching, Landine Bugnol, and Lavinia Liardo, but also our consultant Linda Kate Stockholm, who's also here in the room. Thanks very much. Also like to thank Seamus and his team at CONCORD for the efforts in producing the paper. It was a really tough job to have it produced at this last minute, ready for us today. Thanks very much for that, and also thanks Brood für die Welt for hosting us today at this meeting. Let me start with the question, why did we do this paper in the first place? And I'd like to give three answers for that. I think the first one is our shared concern with the human rights of migrants being in transit or in destination countries or still in the process of leaving their countries of origin. and especially those who are forced to leave, forced to migrate because of war, or violence, or extreme poverty, or human rights violations. In our view, migration should be something, a free choice, an option, and not a necessity in order to keep living or survive. The Spotlight paper speaks in this respect about unchosen migration. In our view, the migration journeys should be short and safe. Instead, nowadays, the costs and risks are enormous. With thousands of casualties, we read in the press each year in the Mediterranean, and unknown figures in the journeys across Africa and in other continents. The second reason is our shared concern with the lack of development, especially in fragile context, in conflict states, in post-conflict states. And what progress could be made, we've been wondering, if the EU would fully concentrate all its efforts on tackling the root causes of forced migration and displacement, along with the international protection of migrants, and making this their #1 priority. And the third one is a positive one. And our enthusiasm, our appreciation that PCD is actually a treaty obligation, and that the EU has selected migration as one of their 5 priorities for policy coherence for development. That's something positive. It offers hope for improved policies and practices and improved lives on the ground eventually. PCD means coherence among policies. We know it's a rather vague term, but in our view, the development concerns and objectives should come first. And therefore we are, over the past few years, promoting a number of policy recommendations. Seamus already said this is not a new topic. We've been working on it for some time. And on page 3, you see the kind of policy recommendations that we've been pushing for the last couple of months. Thank you. First, tackling the root causes. It's on page 3 of the document. First, tackling the root causes of forced migration and displacement. Also, the facilitating and improving regular migration through the creation of more legal ways to enter the EU. Facilitating the regular entry of people in need of international protection and refugees. Promoting the development potential of migration. Fighting trafficking in human beings. Promoting the integration of migrants in EU countries in the fight against xenophobia and discrimination. Facilitating financial, knowledge and skills transfers of migrants, including through the reduction of the cost of migration and the reduction of the transaction cost of remittances. And last but not least, the joining of the 1990 UN Convention on Workers' Rights. So these policy priorities, they're not new, and they've gained, gladly we think, more attention in recent times, especially since the so-called migration or refugee crisis in Europe. They've become to some extent part of the EU policy discourse, and the underlying concerns we think are widely shared in policy circles. And on paper, this looks nice. However, when the world is on fire, you cannot put fire out with just paperwork. For example, Seamus, you asked us to be a bit provocative, so I'll do my best.
I'm sure you did the invitation.
If we're really concerned with fragility, why not develop a specific policy approach and put our resources to it? If we are really concerned with decent working conditions for migrants, why not ratify and implement the 1990 UN Convention on migrant workers' rights and related ILO conventions? If we are really concerned with safe migration, and the dead children washing up on our shores? Why not ensure safe passage, expand legal migration options, and temporarily lift carrier sanctions? And if we are really concerned with international protection, why not expand humanitarian visa and family reunification? This spotlight paper argues that migration management and border control are key elements of a security-driven agenda that dominates EU policy making at the moment. In short, PCS instead of PCD, Policy Coherence for Security. This means, in practice, less migration rather than safe migration. It means, in practice, return migration rather than fair and responsible migration. And if we see what has been adopted in September at SDG Summit, all the European member states, in fact, all states have adopted target 10.7, which agrees that we will all be working towards fair, safe, responsible, and regular migration. So hopefully that will also be a positive encouragement for further EU policy making. We feel that this also means that development aid is one of the instruments of a more for more approach. Discussions with developing countries have looked at the approach of more agreements on migration in return for more development aid, and also in the case of trade concessions. And also, we've seen that readmission clauses have been added to development aid budgets, meaning that recipient countries will have to take back their nationals in order to receive those aid budgets. This more for more approach is still better than a less for less approach, which we've also seen in the past. When aid budgets are cut in the case when a recipient country is actually unwilling to take back their nationals, as happened in the case of Ghana a couple of years back, when the Dutch government decided to cut its bilateral aid with 10 million because the Ghanese authorities were unwilling to take back their nationals. In this context, the paper refers to the outcome of the Valletta Summit, which, as you may know, happened last November. And that launched an emergency trust fund for some 25 African countries. It was a trust fund with a value of 2 billion euros. Our concern is and was that this is, first of all, not enough to address the root causes in those countries. It's quite a number. If you compare it to the budget for just Turkey, which was agreed a month later, it was 3 billion. It's a massive difference. And second, we found that the money that was put forward was largely relabeled existing funds, and part of it, a large part of it, was taken from the 11th EDF reserve. So we'd rather have seen this to be fresh and new money. And thirdly, we're concerned that this aid money will be used for migration management and border control, rather than addressing the root causes or promoting international protection. But we still have to see where the funds will be used for which type of project specifically. Now, last September, Commission President Juncker, in his State of the Union, challenged the rather populist view that less migration to Europe is in our own self-interest. And in this respect, he referred to recent demographic trends in Europe, and he seemed to suggest that we actually need migrants in Europe. And this was echoed in some member states. So why not embrace the global recognition in the SDGs of the positive and transformative contribution of migrants and migration to sustainable development, both here and there. For example, migrants are responsible for 70% of new businesses in the UK last year. Migrants have also set up companies in the US, such as Yahoo and eBay. Migrants have, in fact, in history, further back, set up the Swiss watches industry. These were actually French migrants going to Switzerland. Now we speak about Swiss clockwork, but these were actually French migrants starting this industry. And we should also look at the kind of social and financial remittances and the way they promote sustainable development in countries back home. So shouldn't we say more migration, more development? Question mark. This spotlight paper includes 4 areas of recommendations. The first one is about mobility partnerships, where we agree that they are basically designed to fight irregular migration. Based on the example of Cabo Verde, but also the examples of Tunisia and Moldova, we recommend the mobility partnerships to be reformed into an agreement that facilitates temporary migration, expands regular migration and visa facilitation, promotes business and social investment opportunities, and hence becomes a migration instrument promoting development, especially if you also link it to diaspora engagement. The second recommendation is about labor migration, where we disagree with the selective approach to favor high-skilled over low-skilled labor. This leads to brain drain in countries of origin, while contributing to economic growth and development in destination countries, such as Europe. The paper quotes the example of Ghanaian doctors and nurses working in Europe and states that this costs Ghana 3 times more as compared to the remittances that are sent back. Instead, we argue for brain gain, brain circulation policies that facilitate temporary employment in Europe. Then people using the gained skills, competencies, and experiences going back home, either for short-term, longer-term, or even indefinite, but still maintaining the option to come back to Europe. The quote in the paper says, "Greater mobility is likely to be the most suitable and efficient response over the long term." Page 6 at the bottom. We recommend such labor mobility agreements with third countries, based on decent work standards, of course. The third area of recommendation is about aid conditionality and the instrumentalization of aid also. In our view, aid is meant to promote development, fight injustice and exclusion, tackle root causes of forced migration and displacement, and ensure promotion of human rights and international protection. Aid is, in our view, not meant to reduce migration, fight irregular migration, be conditional on readmission of nationals, or be reduced if recipient countries are unwilling to cooperate. As the paper says in this section, in these cases, PCD is still very far away. The fourth and last area of recommendation is about migration and security. And the title of the spotlight paper refers to the securities perspective of migration prevailing over the development perspective. This relates to migrants and migration as a security threat to be restricted, controlled, reduced, managed. We all know the term Fortress Europe. This has led to enormous resources to go into border control as compared to development aid budgets. It has also led to fighting human smugglers and traffickers with military means. And we feel that this will not stop them, but it will make the journeys of migrants more risky and more costly. We also feel it has a negative impact on human rights of migrants and refugees. And the paper quotes François Crépeau, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants, who says, the overall focus on security and the lack of policy coherence within the approach as a whole creates a risk that any benefits arising from human rights and development projects will be overshadowed by the secondary effects of more security-focused policies. And lastly, we feel that the development aid budgets used for migration are increasingly used for migration management, which is a concern that we also expressed, as I said earlier, with regard to the Valletta Trust Fund. So in conclusion, I think in our view, the PCD treaty obligation forces policymakers at the European level to put development concerns and objectives at the center of EU policies. We feel this will benefit sending countries, first of all, migrants, refugees, but in the end, it will also benefit the EU itself. Thanks very much for your attention. I hope that this spotlight paper will spur the debate this afternoon on how we can promote a coherence around migration and development, not just this afternoon, but also back home in your dialogues with your governments, with your members of parliament, and also here in Brussels with the EU institutions. Thanks very much.
Thanks very, very much, Bob, and to all the speakers. Just before going on to the second part of the programme, which Connie Reuter is going to guide us through, this is the CONCORD and allies, if you like, sort of powerhouse, putting together these tools, working on this issue. And just before we go on to the more sort of policy debate, if there's any questions or comments from the audience to any of our speakers, looking at policy or to his presentation or his experience in anybody would like to ask a question at this point? So was that tricky first one? Yes, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
May it also be a comment?
Yeah, yes, of
My name is
course.
Doris Peschke of the Churches Commission for Migrants in Europe. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. It's very important also to hear in such meetings when we then go into policy debates, what does it actually mean for persons? And thanks for sharing the myths around migration, because I think such a community really need desperately to fight some of the myths. Thanks very much for that work and for the elaboration of that.
Great, thanks a lot. Yes, question at the back, yeah.
I just wanted to comment. So, my name is Samantha. I'm a student from the US living here for this semester, and I'm entering another year here in Parliament, but I'm really interested in migration. So, sort of directed, both my parents are immigrants from Mexico, and they went to the US. So, I was just wondering, I don't know what the second part entails yet, but sort of just like the stance, because especially with how migration is spoken about in the US compared to here in Europe, it's so contrasting. And of course, everyone's going to jump on participants. But so I've been enjoying it so far.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Any other questions? Yes, Laura.
Thank you. Laura Sullivan, I'm from Actually, but here as a member of the CONCORD board. Really brilliant presentations, and never any need to say sorry for your English, because A, it was excellent, and B, if it wasn't, it's no problem anyway. So thank you for speaking in another language. So just one question to you, Bob, really on the last presentation, which was excellent. I wonder, on the one hand, we have a critique around government's tendency to really link migration to economic interests of the European Union in this context. And I wonder, is there a risk also when we use facts such as, in the UK, 70% of new SMEs come from migrant communities? Are we then moving into the same framing around almost economic justification for the movement of people, rather than there was a right to movement anyway, and rather than we are all migrants in a sense, whether we're from the US or the EU, or what would the US be without migration, for that matter, a little bit further back, what would Europe be without migration? So I just wonder, what do you think there's any, do we have to think about that a little bit, the framing of our arguments?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think for speaking for myself, I would like to use a whole series of arguments why we should treat people in a humane way, why we should be a welcoming society as we've always been, and the main issue is that we've always been migrating, and that it is a positive force. But if it helps with some circles to also reflect on demographic issues or economic self-interest issues, I think those issues are being discussed more and more also in the general public. And personally, I feel that it helps strengthen the case. But I see also your concern that these are not the real reasons why we should be advocating. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Bob. If you don't mind, I'm going to move on and pass over to Connie. And Connie, I'm sure you will chair so well that you will give chance for also other interaction and comments from the floor. But I am very conscious we've got very busy people here who are really keen also to talk to and hear their response to what we have to say. So I'm going to use my prerogative to thank very, very much all the speakers for setting us off and for kind of demonstrating the work you've been doing and the tools you're putting a little bit at our disposal. And Connie, many of you will know, is the head of the Solidar office here in Brussels. And I think I'm delighted, Connie, that you've made time to come and help us with this other bit of the session, because you're extremely good at this kind of thing. And also Solidar and the work that Solidar does, in some ways also straddles work in Europe and work outside Europe. And I think that's particularly relevant to this topic. So, Connie, over to you. Thanks very much to the guests. Okay.
Okay, there are some friends who put you in difficulty because somebody say you will share it so excellently well. Friends, lower it down, that helps. First of all, I want the second panel to sit down, and then we can start with the second session. Okay, perfect. Well, I think we have good, it was good to start, and also for me to participate in the end of the first panel, to see a little bit where we are, what we discuss. And I think if we need, it's not about storytelling, but sometimes people on communication say the modern way is storytelling. I think your story is not the storytelling. It is about what is the reality, what is the truth, what brings people to undergo all these risks to make this trip and this travel, and also to testimony on the readiness, on something which we call integration, on the readiness to get involved and to build up on your future. And I think this is the positive message we have to bring. I could be a little bit pessimistic, which I tend to be on this issue, but let's be optimistic. I think out of this meeting we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility because it is not to repeat 100 times what we already know, what we are convinced of. I think we are now, in a sense, in a quite historical shift situation. I'm not speaking on the so-called tech shift of the conservative and nationalist government in Belgium, I'm speaking on the political shift in opinion. And I think this is really, it is key because it is not just on some policy making. It has to do on the cohesion of our societies, not only inside of Europe, but also outside of Europe. And the arguments, we have them, the stories, we know them, and the policy making. And I think therefore the title is so important if we speak this famous PCD, which was Policy Coherence or Development. Well, if there would be some more coherence in European policies, sorry to say the presence of representatives of the European Commission, but we have to say it, if there would be some more coherence in neighbor policy, in development policy, and also in social policies, yeah, then we could make a lot of more progress, social progress, not only inside of Europe, but also outside of Europe. When I was listening to the presentations here, I had two music titles in mind for those of my generation. Perhaps some Dutch also know Golden Earring. This sounds familiar. Yeah, there was a song which was called Back Home. And when you sing, yeah, because this is the work. It is good to have the debates here in Brussels. It is good to sit here in this room and or in other rooms amongst us. But we have to go out, yeah, make our advocacy work, but also have an impact on public opinion in the different countries, because this is how it counts. And then when you ever want to understand what is the dimension of it, and our friend from Syria was very polite in the way he's speaking, but then just go on YouTube, look to Led Zeppelin and listen to Robert Plant when he's crying in the immigrant song. This cry translates everything. This is what we have to do. Cry out loud, shout, and stand up and stand for our conviction to do something which brings a political change in this situation. Because continuing like this and saying, there's a public opinion, it's difficult, and so on and so on, I think then we will, in the end, as even the President of the Council said it, Mr. Tusk, if we do not, it's not on managing, but if we do not find political answers and the shift in policies, then we will see an implosion of our European integration project. So this is my positive message. It is not only implosion, but the positive message is that we can change something, and that there's a possibility to contribute to it. We have heard on the presentation of the CONCORD paper, and I think really this CONCORD paper integrates the most important recommendations, but which really we should not only discuss here, but to see how to implement it. And therefore, I'm very happy that we have a very select panel now for the second round. Let me just remind the 4 points that Bob made. There is the number one, which is on the mobility partnerships. I think you were very clear on it, and I think we do not need to come back to explain what is understood there. The second is also the question of labor migration. And I don't see, at least not too many of our friends from the trade unions in the room. Yeah, but it is so important not to fall into the trap and say we protect the labor market against those foreigners who come from outside. But the question is also not only on social integration, on education integration, integration in housing project. It is very much to do also in the labor market integration and to see what does it mean, skills and qualifications. The number three, and this is really a hot potato, because even in the social democratic family, some political leaders that I hear, that you hear, that we hear, have this fantastic idea and saying if we have to send back people to their countries of origin, which are called safe countries now, if they don't take them back, then we cut the development aid. And then you think, sorry, what is the world we are living in? Are they serious? Number four, this is the myth of security. For sure, we want to all live in security. We don't want to be killed in a bomb attack. We don't want to be killed by a car accident. We want to have security everywhere. But the reality is that if we put always on the question of migration, the refugees, the question on security, let them start where it starts. It is about the security in Iraq. It is about the security in Afghanistan. It is about the security in Syria and in other parts. And this is forgotten. And I think this was also a big mistake, a lack of coherence in European policies when we always discussed on security and stability. And this brought us to accept, to cooperate with political dictators, like the ones in Egypt. Impact of public opinion. Now we have the result. Yeah, now Asia, it is the harvest in the sense of policy falls from before. But let's say we are not here in Jerusalem on a wall of complaints. We should be able to discuss on policies. And therefore, first of all, I want to welcome very much Carmen Hagenaars. And what we representatives from the European Commission, Stefano Signore, sounding name, and also the other sounding name is Pawel Busiakiewicz from the European Commission. This is important for the global dimension. From the United also we have seen that we have which has joined us also, and I think it was mentioned. We have now something in our hands which is an enormous capital, political capital with which we should work, which finally on paper it should be something concrete, and therefore I think it is good that you have joined us. And then we have for sure our friends from CONCORD. We have Sophia Wirsching from Brot für die Welt. I'm a German, you might hear it. English is only my fourth language, so sorry for that. But from Bread for the World, and Bob, who made already the presentations. So I'm a master of disaster. We are 12 minutes delayed. So we will try to wrap up a little bit because it will be important that we exchange after all these presentations. And the first person I want to give the floor to is Carmen Hagenaars for the Dutch presidency. What do you think on these policy recommendations which have been developed by CONCORD, and where is the setting of priorities in this field from the Dutch presidency? So the floor is yours. It was initially 10 minutes. If you could reduce it to 9 or to 8, it would be great. So here, I take your seat in the meantime.
Thank you. No, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. We wanted to host this at our firm, but there was some logistical hiccups. The first month, everybody wants to organize things in our firm, so it was just full. But I very much welcome this debate. I think it's completely not a new debate, as many of you already said. Migration and development, it's something that has been on the agenda for long. I worked on it since I joined the ministry a lot on this topic, and I think what I just took out of the presentation just before is we have to keep in mind we talk about people, and that is basically the starting point. We don't talk about policies only. We talk about people who move to another place in order to find usually a better living circumstances. So I think that is that for me personally, I would say is one of the elements. Taking out the positive elements of migration, I mean, in this debate that we have now in Europe is not an easy one. I mean, you try to take the positive note, but it put a lot of pressure on Europe at this moment. Everybody is following that very closely. Heated debates between justice ministers, between the 28 member states countries. I think we don't fully agree with each other on things. Then there's differences between justice ministers and foreign affairs ministers and development ministers. So it's a complex issue, and I think that's my first point that I wanted to make. It's highly political, and I think, you know, if we want it or not, we have to deal with political solutions to find answers. In that sense, I think it is key to stay in close contact and to really have these debates with all layers of the population, with civil society, with migrants themselves, also to see how ideas and policies fit together. For our presidency, it will be one of the main topics on the agenda for the coming months. The first informal Justice and Home Affairs Council will be next week, 26th of January. Where also migration will be debated. Also on the informal Council of Development Ministers on the 1st and 2nd of February, it will be one of the topics that we address. So I think for the coming months in our presidency program, we will see this featuring a lot. A second topic that I wanted to make, I think we should also see migration as a structural issue, as a structural thing, and find longer term solutions to it. As we see now, the agenda for migration has been formulated. I think we should also, give it the time to develop it. And I think we should also be criticizing what we think doesn't suit or doesn't go well. But if we look at the Valletta Action Plan, the Valletta Summit, and now building up the trust fund, I mean, it was started in November, so what can you expect now as results? So we should also be honest in a way that development results don't come from today to tomorrow. We should also look at the longer term vision. In that sense, I think it's also important to mention here the initiative of the Commission, but maybe my colleagues will come in later on that, linking more humanitarian and development initiatives and aid. I think that is one of the topics that is key. The World Humanitarian Summit in May in Istanbul, sorry, is also very important in that sense. And the last general point I wanted to make is on PCD as term. I think it stayed for long a very conceptual thing. Reports on PCD every 2 years, which was more a paper exercise. Under Luxembourg presidency, I think we moved a bit forward and really had, at least in my area of the council formations, we had real discussions on really trying to link up different policies better, one of them being migration and development. So also there, it's not a one-day solution to it, but I think the debates, and I think in many countries we see it linking up closer and closer. I think if I take the example from the Netherlands, we had this coherence unit starting up in, I think, 2004, and then it was like migration and development, and now it is, it is common to have those two on the table and to discuss on the two and have dialogues with partner countries on several themes, and not only specifically, for example, on return and readmission, but have a broader discussion. On your recommendations in the paper, I think I liked the paper very much. The example of the Netherlands was a good one, I would say. I have 3 remarks on the security dimension. I'm not sure if I fully agree that is the prevailing element in the development policy of the EU. I think I don't know the numbers, but if you look at the means going to food security, to health issues, I think that is overall the big bulk of the development aid still now. In the EU Trust Fund, for example, there is elements on border security and border management. There's also elements on working on border areas, on populations in border zones. If you look at Western Africa, I mean, the key areas where there's least development is usually in these regions around borders, where people basically have to struggle. So I think it's broader than only border management. It's not only that. Secondly, on economic self-interest, well, personally, I also think that the solution in the end is in finding ways of moving to a more labor mobility. That said, I mean, those are political decisions. We all know that not all governments are ready to take these steps ahead. I think the mobility partnerships are a good step in that sense. I think visa facilitation is part of those partnerships, and I think also there work should be continued, and we should look at how far we can go with agreement of our member states. And then the last recommendation, or the last point that I wanted to raise on your recommendations, is on the conditionality. Well, there I think I fully agree. More for more or less for less. I think we have in the Netherlands seen that with the Ghana example, that cutting aid did not work out as we would have wanted to. On the other hand, partnerships and dialogues with countries are broader than that. So I think we should also be honest with countries where we work in on issues that we have, and basically also explain our political rationale or our political issues that we have. So I mean, it doesn't have to be a taboo, but just plainly cutting aid in order to have more people return. I think that is too simple a reason, I would say. Then maybe the last point on, and that's not in your recommendations, but I think on migration, what I always find the big challenge is to find ways in how specific is your approach, basically. If we look at the Valletta Trust Fund, it's or the Valletta Action Plan for 20-something countries in Africa, how can you think of an approach as that? So I think we have to go further, look at the regional level, look at the national and even the local level. If you look at Niger, it's basically a lot of transit, it's a transit country. If you look at Mali, it's many of the migrants from Mali are from one group, from the Soninke. It's very specific per country, per region, what is the reasoning behind the migration and then also the solution to it. So if we could find solutions to it. So in that sense, I think also the link between migration and development directly is a difficult one to prove, basically. I mean, if we put in €1 for development, does it lead to less migration? I mean, we've never had figures or demonstrated that it's as easy as that. But overall, I think we welcome very much your report. I think the recommendations are very to the point, and well, look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's always good to hear that's good. Someone is looking from the presence, looking forward on cooperation, and I think it's good also that you mentioned the point on which we may have to come back, and I'm sure that Bob and Sophia will come back on this issue that you raised. Yes, for sure, there's a specific approach which makes it sometimes difficult, but the question is how can you generalize the political line, and this will be now the ideal transition to both speakers from the European Commission. First of all, to give the floor to Stefano Signore from DEVCO. So there's also your reaction on the policy paper. And yeah, the matter of coherence, as I said, is a coherence not only between, for sure, within the Commission services, but also between the other European institutions, meaning Parliament, ESC, and also with the Council. So the question is what can be out of these papers can be the step that perhaps can be introduced in the policy conclusions of the Dutch presidency and also for the trio to be continued. So the floor is yours for some 7 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. First of all, thanks also for the opportunity to be here and also to praise the work that all of you, your organization, the founding NGOs and entities which constitute CONCORD daily carry out in the different member states in this important area. So that is also an occasion to state that from our side. I think that I agree very much on several points that Carmen just mentioned. First of all, that the link between migration and development is there, but is a complex one. It is a complex one where we have to be honest. There is no consensus, both from a political point of view, but also from an operational point of view. We know that by far and large, migration has a potential to have a positive impact on development of, in particular, of the developing countries, but also of, let's say, all the other countries. And that, however, let's say the governance of migration is a challenging one. If you look at the discussion which, for instance, have taken place and are still taking place within the framework of the new 2030 agenda, we have to reckon the discussion has been difficult amongst the different actors, that still, for instance, for what concerns the indicators, the work shows that it's even complicated to agree on indicators, which then translate the achievement of certain targets that have been agreed upon. Therefore, we are in an area where, by definition, we have to keep in mind that
there is not one size fits all, and that we always have to challenge not only the other but also ourselves. Now, the starting point is that indeed, I mean, we agree that the human rights of each person and therefore of each migrant is at the very center of what we have to do. And this is, let's say, the starting point. And I think, honestly, that although, I mean, we may have opinions, different opinions about the matter, the European Union institution, European Union member state are nonetheless at the forefront of the effort that are made in order to ensure that a human right, let's say, compliant approach is as much as possible ensured. Now, if we look at the role of development cooperation, again, as Carmen has mentioned, let's not forget that the development cooperation is there to serve the purpose which the treaty imposes on ourselves, which is to have, let's say, long-term perspective of eradicating poverty, and this is what we are doing. I mean, if you look where the money of development cooperation is going, it's going to exactly education, health, rural development, infrastructure, employment, and so on. So from that point of view, there is no deviation, I would say, from the rule which is there in the treaty and the different legal basis. It is true that there is an emergence, let's say, of migration as a component, as a tenet of the policy toolbox and also of the operational toolbox, which also impact on development cooperation, and this amongst, let's say, according to two different volets. The first one is that indeed there is more attention recently to focus on addressing the root causes of irregular migration, forced displacement, because this is something that is acknowledged as being, let's say, important to address. Migration governance. We have to avoid an Eurocentric approach. I mean, we need to keep in mind that now almost 40% of the migration, international migration, is so-called South-South. That challenges that we are facing are more and more going to be those also that a number of partner countries are already facing now, as country of origin, as country of transit or destination, and many times these two or three different, let's say, features are combined together, and therefore it is in the common interest to promote, let's say, a proper migration governance, which means legislation, which means building capacity, which means cooperation. We have mentioned the trust fund, and we have mentioned what has been done in most recent times. Let's not forget that trust fund is a complementary tool which has been, let's say, added to financial means. If we only talk about the sub-Saharan Africa, which is, let's say, the remit of the geographical focus of the trust fund, we have 11 billion euro which are available under development cooperation in the period 2014-2020. And if we talk about the member state, EU plus member states, we have roughly 20 billion euro per year for Africa in the period, let's say, that we are mentioning. So let's not only focus at something which has been mobilized on top as an additional tool to address the let's say, the different challenges. And again, in the trust fund, there are several components. There is a component of resilience, food security, there is employment, use, and there is migration management, and there is a fourth component on human rights, security, rule of law. If you look, for instance, at the first group of projects that have been adopted after the launch of the trust fund in December and in January, for an amount of roughly 350 million, you can easily see that a number of those projects concern displaced person refugees in certain areas, which are, let's say, particularly migration prone. But again, it's not security. It's not, I mean, border management. There will be probably something on border management. There will be something on security. But let's be factual. Let's look at what is adopted, what is decided, and concretely launched. Conditionality, again, I mean, there is no conditionality that we are applying to development cooperation, and that is a fact, the time we speak. However, we are ready to engage more with countries facing certain challenges linked to stability, linked to let's say, a number of issues which may lead to irregular migration, forced displacement. And this also reflected in the different clusters of work of the Valletta process, where there is a cluster on economic opportunities, job creation, and so on. And there are other clusters which are more related to, let's say, what can be defined migration management. When we talk about migration management, there is not only, let's say, curbing irregular migration. There is, for instance, working with partner countries in order to ensure protection of refugees or displaced persons, countering the trafficking of human beings. So there are a number of areas of cooperation where we believe that is in the common interest to promote common work. Forced displacement has been mentioned. This is really a major driver because we see more and more that we are at an historical phase where there is the highest ever number of forcibly displaced persons and refugees around the world, probably the area now of 63, 64 millions. And that less and less, I mean, these persons are able to go back to their countries of origin, which means that we need to work more on the link between humanitarian assistance and development in order to make it sure that the development component is there from the very start. In 2016, I hope that all this trend of work will be let's say, continued. The ministers of the development are going to talk about migration and development in Amsterdam on 2nd of February. The G20 also has talked about migration. In September 2016, there is a big event at the United Nations in New York. So again, I think that notwithstanding the crisis mode that a bit, let's say, affect the European policy, let's also be not necessarily pessimistic, and let's also concentrate on the different strands of work which are there and on which we all have to commit and we all have to deliver. I will stop there because 7 minutes is not that much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's indeed 7 minutes, even what it was 10 is not very much because the purpose, I have many things to be said, but perhaps during the debate we will have more opportunities to come back, and thank you very much. And I think it's also important that, well, I'm not always a big friend of these institutional gatherings where you have civil society mobilized around this summit and that summit, but nevertheless, it is always a window of opportunity. And based on the paper that you have been developing for CONCORD, I think there's something not only to communicate, but something we can build upon. So thank you very much from the perspective from DEVCO. I now hand over the floor to Mr. Pawel Busiakiewicz, who is from DG Home. Same question, same topic, same subject, and the same number of minutes available.
Thank you very much. And yes, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here and for giving me the opportunity to, first of all, to listen to, I must say, normally different point of view than what I usually listen in my DG, by working here for now more than 10 years. But I also want to bring to you a little bit of a different perspective from what we work on daily basis. First of all, I'll try to concentrate on 3-4 points. First of all, I would like to bring into the picture the crisis that we are in, and without trying to be, apocalyptic, it is a very serious crisis. Only last year, we had 1,800,000 of illegal crossings of the border. This doubled comparing to 2014, which was already, we thought, a very alarming year. So all this adds up to, on one hand, very political debate indeed, where there's a pressure of certain parties which might end up not really in the favor of actually migrants staying here, but also it causes a lot of challenges in the member states. I mean, they're on daily basis, member states, they face challenge, not all of them, but many of them, with how to accommodate the people arriving, where to find the place. And I'm sure that you all have seen pictures of that, or even participate in that personally. So this is not just a business as usual situation, and replies, according to us, they need to be comprehensive, and that is how we designed our agenda on migration. I would like to stress that agenda on migration started from the very first assumption is saving lives in Mediterranean. You will see that the short-term actions were immediately limit considerably the numbers. Agenda also started with root causes, and we totally agree with the necessity of addressing root causes, be it poverty, be it conflict preventions. However, in the spirit of comprehensiveness, you also need to understand that, I mean, there will be no comprehensive approach on migration if we will not talk about those, let's say, less popular things, which is return of people who stay irregularly, which also tackles the protection of the border, because this is also what our citizens require from us. I mean, it is, I would say, natural that we want that our rules are followed, and we have certain rules to stay on the territory, to cross the border. By the way, all those countries, they also have it. I mean, I travel in 2 weeks to Afghanistan. I have to wait 3 weeks for my visa. So I mean, this is not to say that we will want to stop people from coming for those who have legitimate causes, but those who do not have, we need to send also a clear message. Please do not endeavor in this very dangerous situation, because in the end it might not be so favorable to you. The second point, development and migration nexus. I again fully agree. It needs to be considered. We, by the way, for quite some time actually, we developed this agenda. From 2005, we had a couple of policy papers. The whole global approach to migration and mobility concept also relies on one of the pillars being migration and development. Valletta has as well a clear pillar, root causes of migration. So it is not that we want to disregard. Again, it's a question of comprehensiveness. We think that root causes must be approached, but yes, we also think that there is another layer to management of migration, which, by the way, I mean, the crisis is so big that we only can manage it, and we will not eradicate, we will not just get rid of it from one day to another. We need to also address the other side of the phenomenon. So I would say it is not about, only about the return. It's about putting comprehensiveness and even a coherent approach toward third countries. If I wanted to be a little bit provocative, I might even rephrase the title of the paper. I might even say, development policy. What about migration? Because maybe we should look a little bit even more how to incorporate the migration issues into the development financing. We have heard, big bulk goes for absolutely legitimate causes, for food, etc. But I mean, we do believe that there is still room for maneuver to mainstream the money to the countries in order to reinforce their migration management capacities. On conditionality, I must say that I do not really agree. Actually, you know, for example, I mean, getting a very easy example, for example, Pakistan, which gets development support, which is GSP plus covered. It's not absolutely. I mean, and then they do not cooperate with us on migration management at all. So I mean, if the conditionality was true, actually we would have stopped everything, because we have now a very serious problems with Pakistan to engage on valid management, migration management originating from Pakistan. And in the end, what we are asking is, could you please accept your own nationals who do not fulfill conditions to stay on our soil? So it's not, we are not sending back refugees, people under international protection needs. Most of the time, almost exclusively, these are economic migrants who, I understand the motives of coming to us, but I mean, it needs to be also understood. We have the rules to obey, and I'm actually happy that we have here a colleague from the US, because in the US the approach to obeyance of the migration rules is a very important issue. Now, for legal migration, just to finish it with my 4 points, let's not forget. It is true, first of all, that at EU level we have problems with delivering for the legal migration. That I also fully agree. This has various roots, including history and member states' preference to keep the legal migration channels to themselves. But first of all, let's not forget that the EU is still a destination of legal migration. I mean, in purely legal migration terms, we have issued in 2014 over 2 million resident permits, while with 1/3 of them being family reunification and another third being for study. So I mean, it's not really so much centered toward the economic needs and only the brain drain Europe wanting to get brains from abroad. I know that political sometimes this discourse is very present, but it's not always confirmed by the reality. Also, let us not forget that our very open approach to the migration, to the international refugees flows. I mean, it is also a way of welcoming migrants, and the number are extremely big. I know that, of course, it would be better that we resettle more, that we go and search for people even abroad. I mean, those ideas were there, but nonetheless, it's not that that the main message is do not come here. I mean, the messages are quite opposite. The message says, if you are in need of international protection, if you're fear of persecution, you're welcome. That's, by the way, why the whole flow even rose. So those 4 points, of course, again, I mean, I'm sure that we can improve a lot of things. Mobility partnerships can be improved. They did deliver a couple of things. I agree that they should deliver more. But again, I mean, we are still at the beginning from the migration perspective. We are still relatively young policy comparing to development, definitely. So we still, of course, have a long way to go. And well, I am looking forward also to hearing contributions from you, and I'm sure that groups like you can well contribute to good development of that policy as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution, and I think it's also important that that you spoke out things which perhaps in our communities are not so popular to listen to. Yeah? But I think it's also about realism, and we have to face this issue, and therefore I think it's good, and we will certainly come back on the issue of what does the rule of law mean? What about the conditionality, which was also in the paper, because you gave the example for Pakistan. Yeah. It's an excellent example, but when you send people back, where do they go? And the problem is with those in civil society, for example, we work with, if they come back, where's the problem? The problem is not that just to go back to their country, but then they are persecuted by the Islamists, and you know about the stability and the rule of law in this country. So it's a hot potato. It's not easy, we know about, but I think it's we change on it, and we'll certainly come back. We have now the global dimension, which in fact is a local dimension, but it's a global dimension with Cécile Riallant from the UN and EC Joint Migration and Development Initiative, which is not only on the global perspective, but also some type of good examples and good practice in terms of cooperation and policy coherence, at least at the local level. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. And really thank you for inviting me on this panel, because I think indeed we're touching here about a very important topic, that is policy coherence on migration and development. And of course it is particularly timely as we're looking towards the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which provides for a universal framework in which for the first time migration is embedded. And this new development framework should guide our reflections on coherence on migration and development policies. And this universal framework, which applies both to developed and developing countries, could and should lead to new partnerships and a more balanced dialogue between countries of origin of migration and destination of migration, because this is maybe part of the problem, that we have a dialogue that is not fully balanced. So the emergence as well of non-state actors such as yourself and decentralized levels of governance as essential actors of development should also redefine how policymaking on migration is being done. So how the European Union will adjust to its policy instruments in the face of the new universal development framework is and will be crucial. But it is also important to acknowledge that while the European Union is a very large and very important player in the international migration and development agenda, policy coherence and practical solutions need to be found on a global scale. And I very much want to echo what Stefano was saying before. This is a common responsibility. It's very important to look at it from a European Union point of view, but we really also have to look at it from a much more global point of view if we want to find the right answers. So UNDP very much welcomes this report by CONCORD, which is being launched today. It echoes a lot, in fact, of the recommendations and findings that we had in the Human Development Report that we launched in 2009 that was dealing with the topic of human mobility in a global context. But we also welcome, when it was launched, the EU Agenda on Migration for 2015, which contains very important aspects, particularly its focus on addressing the drivers of migration and ensuring more safe and regular migration channels. And it's true that we need time also to see how all of what is in this agenda can be put in place, and particularly challenging at the time of the refugee crisis that we know. But yet, despite these important headways, it is clear when we think of policy coherence that there are some real issues. And we've been mentioning, the problem of policy coherence between development policies and migration policies, but I think we could go much further, and mention incoherences as well with EU trade policies, agriculture policies, employment, foreign and home affairs, EU policies in general terms. And here it is about policy coherence. So, the issue is much larger maybe than the one that we are looking at very precisely today. But if you allow me, the main argument I'd like to make with you today is that securing and increasing policy coherence is indeed absolutely paramount. But we most and foremost need to tackle what I believe are the wrong premises that support policy on migration in general terms. Efficient policy making on migration and development need to be anchored in acknowledging that in a globalized, interconnected world, migration is a phenomenon that will increasingly define our societies, economies, and cultures, and that policies aiming at controlling migration, even when linked with development objectives, are somehow falling short. So mobility already does and will increasingly be a defining factor shaping our lives, facilitated by modern technologies and means of communication, allowing individuals to become effectively transnational actors, citizens of this world no longer migrate in a linear fashion, but can acquire multiple identities and adopt multiple manners in which they engage with and contribute to the development of various territories at any one time. And this is a revolution. And I don't think somehow our policies are fit for purpose to address that new reality. So countries, but also global cities, will increasingly compete to attract the talents and skills they need for their own development. These should redefine prevailing rules for accessing territories and national labor markets, and also the ways this impacts territories which are less attractive, because this will be very much challenged, and this is a major issue in terms of their development that we have to look forward. In such a context, we need to look at migration from an entirely different perspective. Existing migration policies should be substituted by a very different set of instruments fit for the 21st century, where the focus on human mobility replaces the focus on migration. So we know that human mobility can contribute to development, and how, yet this is inhibited by global rejection of migration due to an overall failure of integration policies, increasing xenophobia, and too much emphasis on migration control. So instead of migration and all the negativity and stereotypes that accompany this concept, we need to be focusing on the good governance of human mobility in relation to sustainable development. We also need to move away from the starting point of policymaking on migration, which currently prevails, and that too often focused on two parallels: good migration versus bad migration. The former group consists of highly skilled expatriates, such as myself, that due to their qualifications have easy access to the labor market with little barriers to their mobility worldwide. The latter makes up the main bulk of migration and consists of lower skilled migrants, where an unjust disparity in their rights and opportunities compared to their former see this person bogged down by border control, stereotypes, and discrimination. Yet these people are central to the world economy and to our overall development. Development cannot be sustainable if we leave behind, and if these people are left behind, and this has clearly been recognized in the new Sustainable Development Goals. So the focus of policy making should be placed on essential aspects, which are the management of diverse societies to address the tremendous challenge which come with this evolution. Diversity worldwide is also diversity in its characteristics, which means that even within one country, mixed migration patterns, socio-economic context, politics, and development needs are varied across the board. And we need, therefore, to look at the impact of migration in local context and think of that dimension when we do policy making on migration and the link with development. So this is why this debate also needs to be opened up to those actors that find themselves at the forefront of dealing with human mobility and where its effects are felt the most, that is at the local level, with local and regional authorities and other local actors. So the GMDI experience, the Joint Migration and Development Experience, the initiative experience, which is supported by the European Union, shows that the most successful migration for development initiatives are achieved at the local level through multi-stakeholder, cross-sector, and cross-policy mainstreaming of migration into local development and policy planning. And that needs to be very strongly anchored also with local and regional authorities, but also in connection, of course, with national level, because if we're looking at policy coherence across the board, we also have obviously to look into that. So let me just finish here and just say that I'd like to emphasize that the protection of migrants' rights is a prerequisite to any successful policy on migration and development. Then, and only then, can human mobility work for development, and we can dare to hope that no one will be left behind. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, and for the interesting contribution, and in particular for the last phrase, that the respect of the rights is requisite. And I think this is something, there is not something that you should beg for, or which is a generosity. No, a right is a right. And although we have actually, at the European level, when it comes to social policies on the debate, on the pillar of minimum social rights, I always say there is no minimum or maximum. A right is a right. The provision is the other side. And I think, yes, it's important to show the contribution and what are the conditions for having a good integration policy, because this is the other translation of what you were describing in terms of the partnership at the local level. We're a little bit delayed. It's not a problem, at least now, is it? Seamus? No, it's not. Let's take some 20 minutes for question and answers. And I think we are not unpolite person, but if you would just go to the topic and not say it was great and good presentations, don't lose the time with it, just come to the point and let's discuss. I think we had the contributions from the Commission, from the Dutch presidency, from the UN, and we have also friends from both the development and for CONCORD side to come back also with the paper and perhaps to also from their side to react. And how do you see now in the light of the contributions we had in this second panel, what do you see what could be some immediate reactions, perhaps, where also even if the paper is now on the paper, perhaps that we also should have some within this community, some more discussions and to go a little bit more in depth. I think that could be also an interesting point. So, please.
Hello, I come from Romania, from the Romanian platform, member of CONCORD. I have a few questions.
Oh, one or two would be nice.
Yes, two. I think would be addressed to Mr. Busiakiewicz. Well, you said that, of course, there was lots of, let's say, lots of people who unfortunately died in the Mediterranean Sea. But to my knowledge, this happened extremely on a high level after the decrease, after the cutting the funds of Mare Nostrum program. So my question is, if you think that cutting funds of such a security program to, I don't know, to monitor and to even help illegal migrants to stay alive, is somehow connected to this high level of death tolls, maybe, and also of irregular migrants who try to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Another question is about, it's for Mr. Signore. And my question is, of course, EU aid is a strong tool to give money to try and increase the level of, let's say, the international developments, mainly in sub-Saharan countries. Yet, it's the European Commission who performs something that we might call tax haven for a few companies. For instance, British Foods, and I'm sure there are others, who these companies are somehow protected by the Commission, and these companies also exploit the natural goods of these sub-Saharan countries. So, how do you see this connection between the funding that the European Union pushes into sub-Saharan countries and let's say the funding, the taxation, which might also be used for this, if it was indeed? Thank you.
Thank you. We get the question and then we have last round for you, please.
Ingrid from Care International. I had a question for Ms. Hagenaars or the Commission, but I think I'll address it to you. In less than a month, the OSCE will be discussing the definition of ODA. And I know you're a development official, so I'm assuming you're in favor of spending ODA where it's supposed to be spent, which is in developing countries. But we all know that more and more of European countries are starting to spend ODA at home and actually want to do more and more of that, which I sincerely believe is a very self-defeating policy. So what will you do in terms of finding agreements at Dutch level that we will be depending at that meeting in less than a month?
Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Katrina Patzelt. I'm working for Hans Seidel Foundation, one of the German political foundations. And I'm also a member, as Hans Seidel Foundation, a member of the European Network of Political Foundations. We're working a lot with the Commission on Development Cooperation. And well, I wanted to say, since you said it, and with the first panel we said it, we need a shift in policy, I don't know, policy approach and also in public opinion on mobility. Let's call it like that, because I like it a lot. It's true, migration has this negative connotation. I think we as political foundations might have a very important role in trying to shape this kind of public opinion and do political education really in this field, actually. But it starts with listening to one another. That's what I would like to say. I mean, we are a foundation, we're based in Bavaria. So it's not always easy to try to change perspectives and taking all somehow all kind of facts, because it's all about facts. I was a bit struck by your actually intervention, because of course here you have the role of the bad guy, sorry to say, but I was struck how you spoke after all the other speeches, because I think there it became quite, you used some of these terms that we heard in the first panel that we are somehow putting into question. Is it a problem? Is it a challenge? Or is it something we have to manage in a better way? So somehow I just want to raise somehow awareness on that, because it struck me a bit. And also, yes, it is a crisis somehow, because the way how Europe manages it is a crisis. And we've stayed for several years now. I think it's not just because since 2 months, but for over a year now. And Lampedusa happened in when? Last year, 2 years ago? It's already quite a long time back. But we stay in this emergency somehow approach. And I come from the Bavarian-Austrian border, so somehow I know what media echo is, and then I'm going there and looking myself. So where is all this catastrophe? I don't see so much, but it's really this change of somehow of approach, and something on PCD. Not only PCD on between development and trade and home affairs, but also part of a CSO committee on this jazz. Yes, and where is the link? Mobility migration is a part in that. Valletta was not really EU-Africa summit, so somehow there's PCD on more levels than just within EU policies. Somehow. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you also for your foundation to take the floor, because I think it's not what you were saying on Bavaria, between the media echo, in particular in Germany, also in some other countries, and the reality in Bavaria. You have the impression that there are two worlds. And in particular, well, by chance I can open a bracket, my brother lives in Upper Bavaria. It's always amazing to see how integration works. But this integration never speak about in concrete when they have a microphone and TV in front of them, because then it's only a problem. So I think it is good that you made this point, and the mobility partnership, this is one thing, and the others, yes, we have not mentioned all the bilateral agreements. Also, we have the EU-Arab dialogue and others, which is on neighborhood policy, which also can be integrated. I think it was good. There are two more, and then there's, yes. Please.
My name is Hans. I work for a Flemish Green Member of Parliament, so within a political perspective, to ask the previous questions. I want to be polite, because the debate is really being poisoned more and more with emotions and fear, which are being used very actively, instead of using facts. And hopefully, more and more of these facts in entering political debate could counter with the very poisoned narrative. I'm less and less proud possessor of a Dutch passport, I must say. And if I look to the Dutch debate, almost every week, not even existing asylum centers are being attacked. Even the mainstream political parties are not actively speaking out against the very poisoned and very fearful debate. So it's indeed very worrying. Now, I'm not a migration expert, but when I read explanations and reports from people who know, it's very clear that the tragedies that we've seen the past year increasing. I believe the number is 29,000 deaths the past decade, that this is directly linked to European policy. The gentleman from Romania already pointed out to it, but what I read from experts is saying, listen, 25 years ago when Europe changed its visa policies, that really contributed largely to the rising of the human trafficking and the money that could be earned with that. I hear nothing about, and this is a general problem in European institutions and policy making, that we are just really blind, and we think that we can't talk about it because then we will maybe enforce the populists and the Eurosceptics. This is a general problem in European debates, and I think especially here it's a huge problem. Then it was already raised by the gentleman from Romania. You know, we talk about development aid and what have you, but the European Partnership Agreements, the EPAs, the agricultural policies that have done great harm on African soils and rural communities, fishery agreements, tax issues were already addressed. All these things together, I hear nothing from the colleagues from the European Commission. And I'm very curious to hear if they engage with their colleagues in the European Commission heavy debates on how to address this, because otherwise it's what we say in Dutch, dweilen met de kraan op, and you're trying to, you know, push away the water and you leave on the tap. And then finally, last week, Council President Donald Tusk was visiting our group in Parliament, and when a Dutch Green MEP asked him a question about the so-called Africa Trust Fund and the fact that it's not really being filled up or pledged, his answer was, listen, all the member states are having severe economical problems and are in austerity programs. That was his answer. Now, when it's about 3 billion euros for Turkey, it goes a lot faster. And I finalized there, which strikes me is that basically Europe is repeating what it has been doing for decades. It's been having very cozy relationships with dictatorships in Northern Africa who have not been very exemplary in good governance, which led partly led to the situation we are facing now. And Europe has not learned. It's doing it again in its cozy relationship with Turkey, while Amnesty International recently put out a report saying Turkey is violating human rights. So for God's sake, what are we talking about here? And so I'm sorry to be not so polite in the end, but it's
I consider you presented your points in a very polite manner, so.
Yeah, the Commission for Migrants in Europe. Thanks for the presentations, and it shows that we are still struggling for the coherence, of course. And also the issues of how do we deal actually with facts. You rightly pointed out that we had 1.8 million illegal border crossings, but that's not people, that's registered border crossings. So how do we come to the fact how many people are actually entering Europe? We have the double counts, the double registrations, and we believe that everyone in Europe is affected by the crisis, but actually they are not. We have 5 countries which currently have a real issue with many asylum applicants and refugees. With the majority of EU countries has very few. Why do they have a crisis mode? I know that the Balkan route and the transit last year was a difficult issue, but then our response needs to be a different one. So how can we ensure that one registration is sufficient to also move to other countries, things like that? Can we understand the crisis in a different way and do not exaggerate it so that everyone believes we have too many? Come to terms with the fact that we can actually deal with the numbers coming to the whole of Europe, and how can we relate that to other regions too, is one of my also the facts and figures. I recently, for an article, looked at the figures for migration. So while the refugee figures have increased over the last 3 years, migration figures have decreased, and that includes the refugee figures. For 2015, figures are not yet out, so it could change, but until 2014, that is a fact. but in the perceptions of people, we have many people to deal with. So how can we address this also with employment issues, and perhaps come to a more rational discussion on how do we manage migration in our own European interest, but also African interest? So can we come back to some more evidence-based discourse in those fields, and with that perhaps also facilitate that mobility partnerships do actually allow people to move?
Thank you very much for making the point on evidence-based. I don't take you again because you have all, no, yet. And then the last one, and then we conclude with the panel.
Laura, the board of CONCORD, thanks for the presentation. I'm not supposed to say that, sorry. Migration and on this issue, I think there's a couple of things we agree on. One is that the scale of number of people moving towards Europe is not going to stop anytime soon. Another is that we need a root cause analysis of this. Not work with home and other relevant DGs, but also member states to check through European policies that are undermining people's rights and actually inciting people to get on the move, causing instability. So the likes of the Belgian arms policy, whereby Belgium is still exporting arms to Saudi Arabia and Middle East, trade policies that are undermining people's rights, tax policies, etc., etc. So this would be one really concrete way forward. And second question, has the Commission considered that by using development money to pay for particularly the hosting, but also the repatriation of migrants and refugees, that we are effectively playing one group of the world's most marginalized people, those people, against another group of the world's most marginalized and poor people, the global poor? The DG Development has valiantly tried to keep the member states on course to reach 0.7. It didn't work. We tried with you. But we know that that money is a small amount. It's got to stay focused. We know we need money to support countries in dealing with the increased numbers, but it needs to be a different budget. What do you say to that?
Thank you. Question and answers on this side is closed. I would like to invite Sophia perhaps to give some thoughts, and then we make the concluding round. So.
Well, thank you. I've been among the authors of this small chapter, so I would like to thank the experts here very much for the contributions, and maybe touch back on some of the points of critique also that you've raised, and also from the audience. So my observation is that there's this at least two discourses on why people become refugees and what drives people to migrate, and how to relate to these movements and what kind of policy to apply. And I think when we were approached to dedicate our work on this Policy Coherence chapter, we found that the migration and development pillar that is in the global approach on migration and mobility of the EU is actually more or less an appendix and not a pillar anymore. So that's what made it so difficult to work on this chapter, and not to automatically relate to the security aspect. And what we found when we dig into policy development in the last 2 years, actually, is a tendency to see development is still understood as a prevention for migration to happen. And even if there are some good policy approaches, like the mobility partnerships, for instance, they offer opportunities for migration to really enhance development and for to allow migrants to become actors of development. But in fact, in the implementation between member states and partnering states that are forming those partnerships, they do not, they actually do not facilitate development, but rather hinder migration and do not offer access to the European Union, but at the same time worsen the situation situation for migrants in those countries who are partnering in those mobility partnerships. For instance, Morocco. Now that the Moroccans are having easier access to the European Union, and the situation for the migrants and refugees intending to come to Europe, or even just migrating to Morocco, their situation in terms of human rights is worsening a lot. So this is a really negative impact on the development of Morocco as well. So it's not that migration and development is not happening, but also that the migration policy of the to stress, and especially worsening developments that we are observing in terms of human rights with the EU AU summit happening in Valletta, and countries partnering now with the European Union on the fight of human trafficking and human smuggling, like Eritrea, are now hindering the people even more to leave their country. And those are actually regimes that are producing refugees and are human rights violating. So this was just some point I would like to stress. And one more thing, it was said several times that the link between migration and development is so difficult. But evidence actually shows that it's not that difficult. For instance, one knows that if legal migration is granted and people have options to work in another country legally and with decent conditions, remittances to the countries where they come from are rising, and also the social security situation of the migrants themselves, but also the positive effects for the sending and the receiving countries are rising as well. So the links between migration and development can also be easily enhanced. This is just a reminder by, for instance, respecting ILO conventions for labor. Well, and I think I'm going to end by just saying that it's important to EU to not forget to acknowledge that migration as such can be an expression of development, and that migrants are actors of development that don't need to be like artificially brought together. It's already a fact now.
Thank you very much, Sophia, because last time we had the example at the time when the remittances from Mali migrants in France were higher than the development cooperation contribution from France to Mali. But you see the result where it ended up for the moment being. So I think it is important, but the difficulty that I always see, all these facts, and Doris has said, at least we know about the facts, figures, and realities. But we face a political landscape and we face an opinion landscape. So the question is, how can we get into both, based on the evidence-based, as you were saying, to get into perhaps some improvement of policy coherence. And this brings me immediately now first to Cécile for a short statement, not another speech, but for a short reaction on the question that has been raised, because we are about to conclude. If not, we will see an empty room in 15 minutes.
No, but very quickly, I think just to build a bit upon what was said and what I said as well. I think one issue that is often overlooked in all these debates is the management of diversity. Our societies are becoming more and more diverse, and we have to step up to the plate. That has consequences in terms of policy making. And somehow this issue is not really central right now, whereas it should be, because this is an avoidable fact. So we have to tackle this new reality, have the right policy options built around it. And I think this is somehow the elephant in the room. We're not really tackling it right in the center. And this is something that applies to us as destination societies, but as well, and I think Stefano said it before, more and more countries that used to be countries of origin are becoming countries of destination. And that's where you have the majority of the human rights violation of migrants. This is where we really need, as international community, to put all of our efforts to build, migration regimes that are fit for purpose. And that's one. So therefore, working more in the South on establishing those principles, enacting the conventions, and so on, should be really one of our priorities. So at the end of the day, we have a very Eurocentric debate, which is of course extremely important. But when we look at the migration challenges and the linkages that we want to establish with development, we really have to work much more in the developing world.
Thank you very much. That's a clear statement, a clear message. Pawel, you are not the bad guy, but you had a role on an issue which is perhaps not the most popular, at least in some of our communities, but at least I think we have an approach on the issues that mentioned. So the questions, one or two questions that were directly addressed to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I must say I got used to the role that I had. So,
half of your salary is paid. This is what a friend told me always.
There is no harm done, and all the interventions were very polite. I've seen worse. No, I mean, getting to the questions. So first of all, about Mare Nostrum and funds. Well, first of all, for Mare Nostrum, it was a European program. It wasn't European action. It was Italian action, and funds. I hope there is no misunderstanding. There were no development funds involved in Mare Nostrum. Now, what happened? I mean, Mare Nostrum was as a follow-up to Lampedusa, and it was reflecting the debate in Italy. However, what it also had as an effect was that the policy was that there would be no more death at the sea. That was what was Mare Nostrum about. Then it also attracted a lot more than anyone would have expected. And that went beyond any capacity. Hence, at a certain point, simply Mare Nostrum was not able to deliver, and that is where also at the European level we developed Nava 4, we developed Father Poseidon, Triton to cover for all those flows. Again, we are not fully successful, but numbers definitely went down after we launched the aforementioned actions. About us being a victim and causing the death, I'm not going to enter into discussion about the root causes, because we would have to go to colonialism and God knows what. But I mean, about the very fact that just by mere fact that we are controlling the borders, we are causing deaths at Mediterranean. I'm not sure. It's a little bit of a shortcut. I mean, I do not know any country in the world which doesn't control its own borders. I am totally, and we are trying to make it in the way that it is not done at harm of people who want to get at our territory. But I mean, again, we cannot expect, and definitely I'm not aware about the discussion which would, lead to, overall consensus in the EU to have an open border, because that's what it basically boils down to. I mean, either we are controlling the border and letting those who have right and not letting those who don't, or we don't control it at all, and then people go in totally free way. And I'm not sure whether we are at this point in time to do it that way. And finally, maybe about the numbers, I totally agree that, for example, in many member states, the situation was exaggerated. I'm Polish, and I can tell you that the hysteria around a couple of thousand migrants, which were supposed to be allocated in the end, there was a couple of hundred maybe relocated. I mean, it was totally disproportionate. And that's where definitely it needs to be, and that's where the Commission also made a lot of efforts to put things into perspective. But also there is a question of big education efforts and then integration efforts, and there are a lot of flanking measures that need to be done, and it also requires time, because it's a question of digesting by the population. With the numbers, again, I mean, you can play 1.1, 1.8 million of entries. How many people are those? And we definitely know that we are about 1 million of asylum seekers, and those are different people. That's for sure, because there is one centralized system. So numbers are big. But of course, again, they can be manipulated in both ways. So that's another.
That the million isn't only their country. I'm German, so they think everyone is only there, which is also so people.
Yeah. And then maybe last thing, I mean, about where is the catastrophe, etc. I mean, I'm not familiar exactly what is, you are much closer to what is happening in Germany, etc. I know only from the colleagues from administrations, also from the smaller countries which are affected very much by the flows. They are struggling about, finding people, places to stay. There are tensions in terms of societies. I mean, in Germany, well, you also have those tensions also then result in some of the incidents which are deplorable. But I mean, there is the situation which puts us at strain.
We could have a debate on German situation, but we will not. But let's say there's something which is important in what you were saying. The question of border protection. I think we also, from our side, we have to accept if we speak on legal channels, there is the other side of the coin of the medal, which has to do that this will only work if there is also control mechanism somewhere. Because if not, it doesn't make sense to have a legal channel of migration. So I'm not sure whether we all own this. And secondly, I think it's important also when you're saying we on the figures and the numbers and also the position of the European Union. On the 3rd of October 2014, 1 year after the first Lampedusa anniversary, I was in a meeting in Lampedusa. Martin Schulz was there, and also Federica Mogherini. They were aggressed verbally by the people, many people there in the audience, and saying, you were the murderers. And then I said, there's something which I don't understand, because they come here, they were absolutely not the murderers. But the problem of the Mare Nostrum, why it didn't come down, what was the message? It was a disaster in the transition period, but the message was, it was the only way, and I think this is perhaps not very popular to say, it was the only way to push the other member states of the European Union to say that Dublin cannot work in saying, oh, they arrive in Lampedusa, take care, it's not our problem. Because this was the other side of the medal, also why the Italians said, we stop Mare Nostrum, because this was to say that the other member states should take over the responsibility, which they completely denied, including one country, which is Germany. But just to Stefano.
Look, I think that I will try to pick up perhaps a couple of questions which have to do with the role of development cooperation. Well, first of all, while I have to say I'm not aware that the Commission is protecting the tax havens, but it's true that the integration on fiscal matters, let's say the European level, has been hampered by the unanimity and a number of concurrent factors. I mean, this Commission has proposed a number of initiatives that haven't met necessarily member state, let's say, agreement. So, but again, I mean, I'm not an expert of the matter what concerns the European level. I mean, the internal market. But on the external side, there is agreement that you, I think, have mentioned a very valid point that, of course, we cannot only look at the development cooperation. That even if you look, for instance, in July, there has been this important international event in Addis Ababa for the so-called financing for development, which was, let's say, ahead of the meeting in New York. And there has been, although the role of the official development assistance has been again highlighted, and there have been a number of commitments made, namely by European member states, there have been a number of areas which have been highlighted as of increasing very high importance, like, for instance, illicit financial flows, the strengthening of fiscal capacity of the developing countries, the so-called domestic resource mobilization. So there are a number of issues which are emerging as factors which on which progress is needed, because otherwise just channeling development aid will never achieve the goal if not complemented by this other track of works. And of course, let's say, well, there is the role of trade, in which honestly I prefer not to enter because it's very...
we will organize another session.
Yes, this requires another session. Now, there has been a mention of the fact, okay, while you target certain population, there is a risk of, let's say, poor against the poor, different categories of poor. But let's not be mistaken. What is happening now is that there is, because of what I was mentioning, this historical high peak of refugees, internally displaced persons, out of which 86% is in developing countries. Okay, so the bulk of it is in developing countries, namely in Africa, but not only. means that the humanitarian actors are called constantly to bring additional money on the table. And what is happening is that, by the way, this humanitarian funding is also eating up a bit the development funding, because in some countries this is used in the same envelope. It's taken by the same envelope. Therefore, it is important to think from the very start about this different situation, because if we know that more and more these situations are going to be protracted, that people with, let's say, in Kenya or in another part of the developing world, these persons are going to stay there for 15 and 20 years. We cannot think of bringing development only after 15 years. We need to think from the very start, because otherwise there is no cost effectiveness. We spend a lot of money. We bring the plastic bottles for 15 years instead of just making a water, let's say, connection. We lose opportunities for both the host communities but also, let's say, the refugees themselves to have self-reliance, to bring economic opportunities to the country where they're in. So let's say that we cannot neglect this dimension. This is becoming an important area of intervention. This is why we are committed to working with them.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Hagenaars, from that presidency, what do you take back of this meeting?
Yeah, and I will be very brief, not only because I have also another meeting myself. So, no, I think, well, I think the recommendations from the report overall, I will take back and remarks made here. I had two specific points that I wanted to follow up on the EU-Africa JASH discussions, and then the follow-up to Valletta. That has been followed up in Valletta. I mean, Valletta was not covering all the African countries, of course, but the references made to the African Union, to the regional organizations, and also to the Khartoum and the Rabat processes were also in Valletta big elements. So I think it's not completely separate processes. I don't fully agree with that. On the OECD, that question that you specifically posed to me, I'm not an expert on that. I know that discussions are ongoing and they will continue on what countries spend on sheltering refugees or asylum seekers. Make a difference between that and exactly what is being used from your development money. Reaching to the converted in the sense. I agree that the development money should not be eaten up by sheltering refugees in our own countries. But also there, it is the reality. Countries are not necessarily in the position to top up constantly their development money. So in a way, I think it's good to have the figures. I think in the meetings in Paris, most of the countries basically said it is extra. It's not eating from the development money, but I think we should really be looking into that and continue to look into that. And on the last note, I think it's good also to express our embarrassment with situations that we see now in Europe. And I think in that sense, we should not exaggerate situations, but on the other hand, reactions in the population are so strong also. I mean, and that's, you can try to follow up with a policy, but it is, it's we call onderbuik discussions. It's discussions that come from the toes of people and not so much from the head. So in a way, I think that is something that I take away from it as well.
And I think this is also our responsibility, and we should think with Seamus and others between the different platforms, the social platform with CONCORD, Civil Society Europe and others, that we sit together also, we can mobilize around our networks, also to work better with our members on the national level, because this is where the house is burning. Mm-hmm. Bob, 2 minutes you promised.
The house is burning. Good statement. Just first on Doris's point about the reduced number of international migrants. The report of UNDESA demonstrated the opposite. In fact, we used to work with a figure of 232, which is also million international migrants, which is also in the report. Last week's DESCO's report speaks about 244 million international migrants, including 20 million refugees. The other 40 million refugees are in fact internally displaced. that shows also the scope of and the trend of the issue. I mean, both Cécile and Carmen said in their presentations, we need time. We need time to put policies in place, to start implementing them, to see the results on the ground. Carmen also referred to linking relief and development aid, the World Humanitarian Summit, and also the Refugee Summit coming up in September in New York. Are not new. I came to Brussels in 1992. I remember working for CITSA, one of the CONCORD members, and one of the first issues that we looked at was linking relief and development aid. So this is not really new, and then I refer back to the two statements of the representatives of the European Commission. One used the term apocalyptic, almost apocalyptic. In fact, Pawel said about the situation in Europe. And Doris rightly said, this is a big issue, obviously, but it is nothing compared to the issues across the Mediterranean. When you have 40 million people internally displaced, when you have a complete mess in Libya, when you have a complete mess in Syria, we heard from Mohammed also. What are we doing as an international community? To make the right point, it's not just the European Union. But what do the member states do there? How many countries are now bombing in Libya? What have we as a collective responsibility in terms of the situation in Libya? It's not just the responsibility of Libyans themselves, you know? And that's why I think that we need to maybe use this policy coherence concept a bit more to stress the sense of urgency, to come up with real policies that make a difference on the ground, and also real budgets. Stefano said we have 20 billion, for the coming 10 years for Africa. But we've spent so many billions already in the past. Have we managed to actually address issues that cause migration and displacement? Is it going into the right direction? Do we need to do development differently, or do we just continue with the status quo? Should we not be pessimistic? Should we not see that situation in Africa as apocalyptic? So that's what I would like to give away. Also in our engagement with policymakers back home, with our governments, with our representatives in the ministries, with our members of parliament, to really see that this needs to be tackled quickly. Also in Europe, because I think that if I talk about this with my own friends, people become very Euro-critical. In fact, I'm very. I used to work here. I'm very Euro positive about the European Union, and many of my friends too. But I think increasingly people are questioning what is going on there. Is this really happening? Is this really going forward? Are we really making progress, or do we need to do something different?
Thank you very much, Bob. I think this is now what we have to take away from this meeting. First of all, I think it's important that we have in the diversity, we don't speak on diversity, but also in our diversity of the responsibilities, that we have a dialogue and we start to build up and construct something. Because there is emergency. Indeed, I was on Monday in Berlin, it was on migration. I was last week in Vienna, it was on migration. On what did our members, progressive, what they say? We do not expect nothing at all anymore from the European Union. We do not expect nothing at all anymore from the European Union. This is also a fire is in the house. And we must pay attention that with this responsibility and also how it works here, policy paper there, that's something which is radically changing. And in the same time, we have a humanitarian emergency. And we have also the necessity of changing an economic policy, which was driven by this blind austerity. But with blind austerity, you cannot invest in education, you cannot invest in education policies, you cannot invest in local development, and you can even not invest in border protection because, well, you have to reduce the state, you have to reduce public expenditure, and in the end, what remains? So therefore, I think, let's be positive in a sense, and considering that around this emergency, there's perhaps a window of opportunity. And we should also pay attention with all the critics that we have towards the European Union. We cannot add oil or gasoline into the fire. We have to say where are things that we can build upon, which also comes from the international community and also from the European Union, because if not, we contribute to those who think there's nothing to expect anymore from the European Union. And this is the end of the European project. So it's a little bit dramatic what I say, but unfortunately, this is how the things are seen also from many, many, not in Brussels, who like me are more or less well paid, but doing this as professional and so on, like you, who are the professionals of this sector, but the citizens, the ordinary ones in a sense, what do they expect? And also in our constituencies, there is no more this enthusiasm. So we have to, in this case of urgency, emergency, we have to build upon something. And there's something very new also. If you look, at least we have a potential, because what you represent, what we represent, it starts in the countries of crisis, because there is development cooperation through your members at national level or bilateral partnerships. It continues all along the Balkan route. It continues also on the water route. And I think this is something which we have also to tell you. It's not a theoretical paper. It is our experience. My organizations, they are all along the Balkan route. Yeah, and it goes up to Sweden, Norway. They are all at the forefront in a certain sense. Like also Protestant organizations, like Catholic organizations, non-faith-based organizations, Islamic, they are all there. And this we have to take into account, because this is a reality. People are still very committed and build upon something. And it is not just a policy paper which is nicely thought, nicely developed, nicely formulated. And I think perhaps should be, I think back on Robert Plant and immigrant song, this should be your inner cry and saying, we need to do it because there is a window of opportunity. And I will not say there is no alternatives. There are always ones, but they are not positive ones. And next, let's say the next rendezvous should be, don't forget, we will have the Migration Forum, which is organized together by the Commission and by the ESC. We will have the Civil Society Day in the ESC also, which is on the question of migration, integration, and living together. So there are different political momentums also here. And I see Seamus shaking their head. I think really this idea of bringing the different NGO, civil society constituency together and build upon what you have been developing, we have been developing on the nexus between migration and development, needs to be continued on the nexus between migration and labor, and needs to be continued also on migration and social policies, and in particular on social investment. And I think this is a little bit what should be the agenda for 2016. So everything is possible if we want it and do it. Thank you very much.